Welcome to STEAM Powered, where I have conversations with women in STEAM to learn a little bit about what they do and who they are. I'm your host, Michelle Ong. My guest today is Keri Bean. Keri is a systems engineer at NASA JPL, where she's deputy lead rover planner and helicopter integration engineer. Join us as we talk about the Curiosity Mars rover, Star Wars, and cake decorating. Hello, Keri. Thank you for joining me today on STEAM Powered. It's wonderful to have you on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So, you studied meteorology at university. What drew you to that field?
Yeah, so I grew up in Texas where you're used to having thunderstorms and hurricanes and all sorts of stuff. And so I was always just kind of naturally drawn to it. I remember being like super scared as a kid during thunderstorms of like, lightning, hide. And then I was like, I just want to learn more about it so I know, what it is, kind of like understand the fear kind of thing. And so that's what really got me interested in meteorology. And I never really knew what I wanted to do with it. I changed my mind a lot of whether I wanted to be, the weather person on TV pointing out your local forecast, or, you know, um, my family was pretty tied into the Air Force. I was living near an Air Force base, so you could be an Air Force meteorology officer, or I wanted to be the person that flew into the hurricanes or drove into the
Wow.
tornadoes or all that kind of stuff. And then when I was in high school, my family did a family vacation to Florida, and it just so happened to be the week of the STS 114 space shuttle launch. And that's
Ooh.
when my love for space started instead of just meteorology.
Oh, wonderful. You started meteorology anyway. So when you were studying, like, did you consider doing astronomy or anything else related to space?
Yeah. So this like really deep space interest started in my between my sophomore and junior year of high school. And at that point I didn't really know how I was going to incorporate that. I was like, I went to space camp just to try it out. And, there's so many different options for working in the space industry. You can be the aerospace engineer building the rockets, you can be the astrophysicist studying the stars. There's so many different things you can do. And I finally decided, why don't I go to school for meteorology? Because it's still very math and sciencey based. It's not going to be, if I really do change my mind, I'll still have gotten a lot of the basic math and science down that, then I just have to learn more of the specialization of, the other fields. So when I was about to go to school, there was like an event that they called Aggie Land Saturday, where they invite all the accepted students to come in and like meet your professors, learn the campus, all that kind of stuff. And it was kind of cold that day, so I was wearing a NASA hoodie. And this one professor in the meteorology department came up to me and said, "Do you like space stuff?" I said, "Yeah, I love space stuff. It's cool. NASA's so cool." And she's like, "Well, you should go talk to this Mark Lemon guy. I don't know what he does, but it's space stuff and it's cool." And so I went home and I like looked up his profile on university website. And he's talking about how he like studies weather on other planets, and I'm like,
Perfect.
"Oh, there you go." Because I knew like Mars had an atmosphere, Jupiter, all
Yeah,
the all that kind of stuff, but it didn't occur to me that was something that you could study.
that's cool.
It worked out.
So, yeah, that worked out perfectly. So when you spoke to that supervisor and started doing stuff, I guess, with Mars meteorology, um, did you think about where you'd be going with that, like pursuing that area of study?
Yeah, so he had me involved in operating Spirit and Opportunity, literally my first week of college.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
so it was like Friday of my first week of classes. He invites me into his office, and I get to listen in to the Mars Rover planning meetings about what kind of science observations they're planning that
Wow, that's
day.
amazing.
I had no idea what was going on. There was a bazillion acronyms flying around, but I was like, this is really cool. I want to be involved in this. And so he got me started with a couple little research projects using Spirit and Opportunity data. And then uh, he sent me to my first planetary science conference, which was over spring break. So, most freshmen, I guess, go out and party. I went to a scientific conference instead. Go me. um,
I'm sure that
Nerd
was more
flag showing.
beneficial though.
Yeah. Yeah. So at the end, I had gathered like all these questions. And so I spent like a whole day pestering him with questions after I got back. And he was like, well, There's this Phoenix Mars lander that's landing this summer on Mars, and I'm in charge of the camera on it. Do you want to come work on the camera? It's like, yeah. So I got to work on the Phoenix Mars lander, which kind of went near the North Pole of Mars in the summer of 2008. And it actually landed 1 year to the day from when I graduated high school. So, and I was the
Goodness.
person in mission control as the images were coming down, the person responsible for like putting them up on the screen for the rest of the team to look at. So that's kind of
Uh,
a,
that's
you know,
amazing.
my mom said she was having like a lot of cognitive dissonance of like seeing me on the screen, with the NASA TV in my face. Is like, how is that my daughter?
Ah. But that's wonderful that you're able to get such direct experience doing all of this stuff while you were still at college. That's great.
Yeah. And so you know, I just completely fell in love with operating spacecraft that summer. Um, I still involved meteorology. So part of what I did with the cameras was actually looking for clouds or dust devils or other meteorology phenomena occurring on the surface. And so it was really fascinating to kind of like combine them of like, okay, well, I know what I'm trying to look for. So now I need to be able to communicate that with the engineers to take the right kind of science observation to continue on. And so I got really good at that. And once, Phoenix was done and all that was kind of wrapped up, it only lasted basically the summer and a little bit into the fall before it got too cold. And he's like, well, there's this other rover called Curiosity that they're going to send soon. I am also working on the cameras for that. Do you want to come do that? Like, yeah. Um,
Goodness.
so yeah, I actually got to work on Curiosity as well for several years.
That's wonderful. And so all of that work that you've been doing and that experience, that's what got you into working directly for JPL?
Yeah, so it was really while I was there for Curiosity, because when a mission first lands for the first, what they call 90 sols, a sol being a Martian day, it's about 40 minutes longer than an Earth day. So, it was close to 3 months or so. They have everyone located at JPL. So, as a science team person, I got to go to JPL and essentially live, in Pasadena, work at JPL every day. And, towards the end, it was getting close to when I would be done with my master's program. And so I was like, hey, JPL, if I was to finish in like May, August, time frame, would I be able to get a job at JPL? And that was during the major recession of a couple of years ago. So I was told we would love to, but we can't. So I started actually looking around, and I had actually gotten contact with someone I met on Phoenix, who is now a professor in Canada, and they weren't having the same issue. So I was about to go do a PhD program with him when JPL called me last second and said, "Things have changed. When can you fly out
Oh,
for an interview?"
fantastic.
So 2 weeks before my master's thesis defense, I was on a plane to Pasadena, did a full day of interviews, immediately flew back and defended. I got a phone call the day after my defense saying, we need a few more weeks to figure it out, but we're going to offer you some sort of job on some sort of mission. We haven't quite figured it out. And at the same time, I got my acceptance letter to the PhD program with a week
Ooh.
deadline to respond. So I called JPL and said, I have to know in a week. Um, and sure enough, like 4 p.m. of the 5 p.m. deadline on the last day, they called me. And that's when I decided to go to JPL.
Of
And
course.
so I started at JPL actually on the 1 year landing anniversary of Curiosity. So that way it'll always
Ooh.
be easy for me to remember. They let me have a choice of start dates. I was like, well, that's the obvious one to me.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I actually started out on the Dawn mission. I left Mars for a couple years, and that was really interesting. So, I kind of mentioned before about what kind of science you want to do, and then you have to work with the engineers to figure out, how to actually make the spacecraft do that. Well, that's exactly what I was doing on Dawn. And a lot of the process was kind of the same from the rovers. But with the rovers, you're kind of planning almost day to day. Whereas with Dawn, you're planning like weeks at a time. So it was a little bit of a different time scale, but the same kind of thought process went into it. And so I found that really fun to kind of, even though, the asteroids that Dawn explored didn't really have atmospheres, the principle was still the same. I could understand the scientists, understand what their goal was, and then work with the engineers to actually, implement it, make sure it worked, all that kind of stuff. So
That's
was quite fun.
brilliant. Yeah, that is very fun. So, with your experience in meteorology and the maths that you're doing, they're directly but indirectly related. So, was there any additional kind of training or learning that you had to do to be able to fill those gaps?
Yeah, so I ended up doing a lot of like reading documentation. There are procedures on how to do the steps. And so I would go through and say, well, this procedure hasn't been updated in a while. This tool doesn't exist anymore. This step doesn't exist anymore because it's been automated or something like that. So one of my first jobs was actually to go through and say, what is actually true of this job? What is not true anymore? You know, figure it
Yeah.
out. Um, and one of the interesting things that I learned on Dawn was working with test beds. So, whenever we have a spacecraft, we always build kind of a backup duplicate here on Earth. So, in the case of something that's like orbiting, like Dawn, it's just a rack of computers, right? It's not a actual spacecraft. With the case of the rovers, we try and build as accurate a model as we can, and then another model that weighs here on Earth what it would on Mars, so you can get better mobility testing. And so on Dawn, I got to use that rack of computers and simulate and test things. And I found I really enjoyed that aspect as well. And so that's something I was able to carry forward once I moved back into working on the rovers, was working on all these different test beds. So, I was never a hands-on engineer by training, so having to learn kind of that, you know, ESD, don't shock the spacecraft, wear the special jackets, plug in, like all that stuff, that was completely foreign to me. Um,
Yeah.
so I've definitely picked up a couple skill sets while at JPL.
That's amazing. So, was that test bed building stuff before or after you built R2D2?
It was actually about the same time. Yeah. So I've been pretty obsessed with Star Wars for a while. And there was a big convention here in Anaheim. And I had already kind of started being interested in R2D2 building. And then what happened was they have this whole room at the Star Wars convention that's nothing but fan built droids. So imagine as like an
Wow.
R2D2 robot fan walking into a room and seeing like 120 of them all bleeping and blooping and lighting up and driving around and all that. And I just kind of lost my mind. I
Oh.
was like, I have to have my own like right now. Um, so I started building my own R2D2 right then. It took about 2 years.
Ooh,
It's not a quick process. And I'm actually one of the quickest who have built it. Most people, it takes a lot longer than 2 years.
that's
Um,
motivation.
yeah. And it was a really interesting process because, I didn't have any of that hands on training. I took like one shop class in middle school. That was
Yeah.
about the extent of me using power tools or anything like that. And so that was really fun. Um, and it kind of has gained me a lot of like credibility among the engineers because I can understand like what they're talking about with like the thread size on screws or understanding blueprints or things like that
Yeah,
I wouldn't have necessarily had experience with. Um, and of
that is
course,
very
anytime
cool.
I take R2D2 to JPL, all of them come like running out of the building and they want to like part. Most of the time he's like, the head is off and everyone's inside looking at all the electronics and all the,
Yeah,
how'd you machine this and all that kind of stuff. So
that's awesome. So you actually did the electronics and the circuitry as well as yourself?
so I didn't do that part. That's the part I'm like not quite as familiar with. And even to this day, I actually have some help. I call them my JPL Jawas. We're, with like 6,000 of the best engineers on the planet. And if you say, hey, can someone come over and help my R2? You're going to have some help that's more than willing to come over and, do this as a hobby.
Yeah.
So, you know, I actually have a back panel where I have everyone sign that has helped work on my R2D2. So everyone gets credit. If
Oh,
they
that's
helped
wonderful.
me, build it, paint it, sand it, whatever it was, they get to sign.
That's fantastic. It's a little team building project. That's so cool. So, yeah, getting back to your day job, um, what does a rover planner actually do?
Yeah. So my kind of everything. Um, my current job, yeah. So the formal title is Rover Planner. The informal title is just Mars Rover Driver. We also operate the robotic arm as well. And so when I was kind of wrapping up on Dawn, I was interested in coming back to working on Opportunity because, my first love was the Mars Rovers, right? And so I started working on some of the more engineering ops roles on Opportunity and kind of worked my way up until I was like in charge of the day to day planning for Opportunity. And one of the things I hadn't done, I was doing almost every single role, but the last one left was Rover Planner. And I didn't really think that I could do it because most of the people at that point who had done it were PhDs in robotics, computer science, that kind of level of, I wasn't anywhere close to that. And one of the women who worked on the rover in that team came up to me one day and said, "Hey, let's go for a walk." And so we're walking around JPL. And she's like, "Have you ever considered being a rover planner?" It's like, well, not really. I mean, I would love to, but it hasn't been on my radar as something I could do. And she's like, "Well, we've seen how you've been able to operate in all these other roles, and we think that you would take the time to learn the robotic side and that you could do it." And so it was really interesting. So they started out, you learn what's called the downlink side. So all the telemetry coming back from the rover, the currents, the temperatures, the voltages, all that kind of stuff. You have to learn, what's safe, what's not safe. We told the rover to do this, but maybe it slipped too much, so it actually did this. Or, learn all those kinds of reactions before they would let you actually, make the commands to send to the rover. And
Yeah.
so I had transitioned, gotten certified for doing the downlink part, and was working my way through the very extensive process to get certified for, sending the commands when we lost contact with Opportunity. My one and only time that I got to send commands was to operate the robotic arm for Opportunity, and I got to place it down on the surface to do
Yeah.
some science. And so I was like fairly close to being done. It usually takes 2 to 3 years to train for this role, and I was about 2.5 years in.
Yeah.
Um, and so at the time, so Curiosity also has rover planners because they, also have a robotic arm and they drive around. And so they said, well, they have like a formal class for rover drivers. So they have like a batch that come in all at once, take formal classes, you have homework, all that kind of stuff. They normally only have four at a time. And they were like, well, we've already picked the four, but you almost finished learning on Opportunity. And, the systems are pretty much the same. The software is pretty similar. Why don't you just come finish your training with us? So I
Yeah.
did. So I started on Curiosity fall of 2018. And yeah, it was a very interesting experience. There's formal classes, there's homeworks, you're doing labs. Um, but a lot of the software was the same, a lot of the people were the same, so they already knew me and kind of knew what I knew already. They
Yeah.
could point out the differences of like, oh well, this changed, you'll need to do this instead,
Oh, that's
all
cool.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I've worked my way up now to actually being a co-deputy lead rover driver for Curiosity. So in
Congratulations.
addition to, yes, thank you. So instead of doing, just the day-to-day work, I'm also involved in a lot more of the like leadership management side of the team. And I've been doing that for just a couple weeks now, but um, I'm pretty excited about that. Who knew a
Yeah.
meteorologist could be a rover driver?
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, but you've put all the hard work into it to get there. So obviously, that's very cool. So with each rover, are you only certified for that specific rover, or is it transferable between rovers?
So you're technically only certified for that rover, but typically the roles and the process are similar enough that if you are certified on one rover, it's pretty quick to turn around and get certified on the other rover.
Ah,
Um,
that's pretty
we'll
cool.
just kind of focus on here's the differences, go.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, you're also a helicopter integration engineer on the Perseverance, and that would be for the Ingenuity drone, right?
Yeah. So um, I'm not like flying the helicopter or anything, but
Okay.
my role is technically from the rover's perspective. So the helicopter is kind of its own component. And
Yeah.
so my job, and there's a couple other of us as well, we want to kind of be that interface between the helicopter and the rover. So, there's constraints on, where can we fly the helicopter, but the rover has to take us to that spot, drop us off, you know, move away, act as the, talk base station. Um, and so, we also want to make sure that the rover activities reflect the helicopter plan. So, in our planning tools are all the correct parameters in there, like all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of my job is interfacing between the two projects.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you were saying that with your Earthside duplicates, like, do you have the Earthside duplicate for the drone as well?
So sort of. So it's not as easily flyable here on Earth. We had to like the big vacuum chamber to get it to fly, and so we do have some models. We're actually in the middle of a test right now of how are we actually going to deploy the helicopter, and
Yeah,
so we're testing how do we want to take pictures of the helicopter when it's under the rover, how do we want to drive away with the helicopter there, like figuring all that kind of components out. We
yeah,
knew the concept, we kind of knew the plan, now it's getting into the nitty gritty details of how actually are we going to do this on Mars in a couple months.
yeah. So is that all like theoretical, or in the gravity chamber, are you able to simulate that, or is that going to be all like computerized analysis?
So a lot of it was kind of computerized analysis. We're not able to change gravity, but we can change
Yeah.
the atmosphere in the vacuum chamber. So we were able to get it down to Mars pressures, and we were able to get the helicopter to fly. So
Oh, that's cool.
I've high confidence we will be able to fly it on Mars.
That's awesome. Yeah, just yeah, trying to visualize and conceptualize all of that stuff in an environment you can't replicate. That's awesome and very difficult. That's cool. So, with all the projects that you're working on, how, like, what does a day in the life of you look like when you're having to work on all these different, well, yeah, completely different projects?
I always joke it's actually pretty similar to any other desk job. I've got, emails and spreadsheets and documents and all sorts of stuff, right? That's a lot of the day to day is just kind of normal office style work.
Yeah.
Um, but it's interspersed with, working on these Mars rovers where really you are just kind of in the zone for the day. You get to ignore everything else. You have a goal for the day of we want the rover to do X, Y, and Z today. And the whole team has to come together to make that happen. Um, and that's actually what I find I'm usually happiest because it's still very technical work, but it's social. That's one of the things
Yeah.
that actually kind of drove me away from pursuing like PhD science kind of person was I still really enjoy, the technical sciencey aspect, but I really miss the social aspect. And
Yes.
so by working in rover operations, I'm still getting that sciencey technical part, but I'm getting to do it with a group of people. And so that's the part I find the most rewarding about working on the rover ops.
Fantastic. So, yeah, just thinking about, yeah, doing all of this stuff kind of remotely. How do you do all of this remotely? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I was part of the team that actually had to figure out how to do it remotely.
yeah,
Because normally we're in a specific room at JPL, and everyone kind of has their little like corner of the room. But at JPL, the rover planners have like big monitors, and we have special 3D glasses that we can use to view the terrain in 3D as
exactly.
we're
Yeah.
practicing driving the rover over it, and all sorts of stuff. How do you do that at home?
Yeah.
So I have two monitors, and uh, one of the things with the rover planners is we're kind of like in our own little corner usually because we have a lot of discussion within ourselves about how we're going to do activities. But there's
Yeah.
also the whole rest of the team. So when I'm on shift now remotely, I have to wear two different headsets on two different meetings for the whole day.
Oh my
And so
goodness.
that's an interesting like component because in the room you're pretty used to being able to like tune out the other room until someone
Yeah.
yells like your name or something. um
Yeah.
but here you constantly have like two conversations going on in your head, and so it can be quite a
Oh, that's
mess.
nuts.
And since we were able to, we're not able to bring home our uh, my cat's about to walk in front of the screen, I'm sorry.
Hey, that's awesome.
Hi.
Hello, cat.
This is Misty.
Ah,
um Here, let me
he's a
grab.
cutie.
Yeah. So, um, normally we would have these like crazy stereo glasses. Well, we couldn't bring that home. So we actually have reverted to using normal red blue glasses for our stereo vision. Uh, so I actually had these,
Lo-fi.
these nice plastic ones. My advisor gave them to me when I was working on all these images
Yeah.
that I was processing as an undergrad. And so it's kind of funny that, I kept it as like a memory and now I'm having to use it day to day again.
So yeah, so like, is it just did you have to get office computer stuff to be kind of shipped out to you, or are you just using your home stuff?
So right before we shut down, they actually had folks come by and like sign out all the equipment.
Yeah,
So they distributed it to us, at the very beginning of lockdown.
but yeah, everything else it's just whatever you can make do with. That's
Hmm.
crazy. Like, how much of a challenge does that create for not being able to have access to all of that stuff?
It's actually not too bad. We certainly had kind of growing pains at first of just trying to figure out, how do you manage having two different mute buttons for two different meetings? You know, just kind of, how do we share what we're doing? Because at least the Rover planners were used to being in that corner and being able to just like roll over and
Yeah,
look at someone else's screen, right? And so, how do you share what we're doing all the time? And just all that kind of stuff. And now we've got it pretty well figured out. And so, it took some growing pains, but I think we've got it all figured out.
that's awesome. Yeah, having to do that for next year, that's going to be that's going to be rough.
So
So, what's the next milestone that you guys are working on for the next projects that you're on?
yeah, so for curiosity, we're still going up Mount Sharp, which is kind of our main goal. And we just wrapped up kind of our finishing touches on what was called the clay unit. And so we actually did a really special experiment, which the acronym for is TMA. And we actually have like a chemical laboratory inside the rover. And this particular experiment, we can only do twice in the entire mission. We only brought enough resources to do it twice. And so
Ooh,
they finally deemed it important enough that we did the first experiment for this while all remote. And so
nice.
that took a lot of coordination and understanding. So that was kind of fun. Do this like mission milestone
Yeah,
completely remote. It was kind of cool. Um, and so we just wrapped up that campaign. And the
yeah,
scientists are still looking into a lot of the details about what's going on there. But now we've started driving off again, so we can continue our route up Mount Sharp. And then, of course, Perseverance landing day. So that'll be
yes.
February 18th. And
Ooh.
so, yeah, so that's coming up real quick.
It is.
Yes. Yeah, so we're putting the finishing touches on our tools and our processes and all that kind of stuff to make sure we're ready for landing day. And
Yeah.
yeah, it'll be really fun. It'll be my third time living on Mars time, so
Oh,
we'll see how
nice.
that goes.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, what sort of preparations do you need to make for landing day?
We essentially want to make sure that the tools have all the capabilities that we need to be able to operate the rover.
So, these physical tools or program tools?
They're all program tools. And so we'll do what's called thread tests. And so they actually, run a thread of like, we want to practice, making the commands to send to the rover. And so you run through all the steps and all the tools and you say, oh, nope, there was a bug here. And they go back and they fix it. And then we try it again and all that kind of stuff. So that's what we're doing a lot of right now is testing. It's almost every week there's a different test going on. And
That's
we
awesome.
also do what's called ORTs or operational readiness tests, and that is more to test the personnel. So instead of just testing the tools, make sure that you're also teaching the people that are going to do their job how to do their job.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of all of that testing is going on right now, making sure everything is all nice and ready.
In my head, it was kind of you'd have to do all that stuff before you send Perseverance. But, it's cool that you can actually do it while it's in motion, while it's traveling. Don't waste time that way.
Yeah.
So, it's just uploaded, all the new instructions, all the tools and stuff like uploaded live while it's in transit.
Essentially, most of the stuff it takes years and years to build. So it's not like they started until after launch, right?
Yeah.
And so now that we've launched, they've now kicked into the actual operation. So we're actually able to hire all the personnel that are going to be able to operate.
Ah,
So even though the tools may be very well developed at this point, the actual personnel are all brand new. So you need to teach them to use the tools. they're going to find new ways to break the tools, so then the tools have to be fixed. And so it's kind of a feedback loop going on.
Yeah.
And they're also finishing writing the flight software for when it actually lands on the surface. And so typically, as soon as a rover lands, maybe like a day or two afterwards, they actually do what's called a flight software transition. And so there won't be like any science or anything for a few days while they actually change it from, we're cruising to Mars to we're now on the surface. You know,
Nice.
the rover doesn't need to know how to drive when it's in space, but it needs to know how to drive when it's on the ground, that sort of thing. It doesn't need to know how to land when it's on the surface, but it's already there, that kind of stuff. So they'll change it out, and then we'll have a period of what's called instrument checkouts. You know, taking the first pictures, using different instruments for the first time, make sure that they work exactly as
Yeah.
we expected them to. And then we're going to do the helicopter flights pretty early on. So as soon as the rover's ready, we'll do the helicopter flight.
Nice.
And then the rover will go on and continue doing science.
That's awesome. So how do you handle like the times when it doesn't do what you expect?
Uh, so that's actually usually when I find the teams are like at their best is,
Yeah.
when they're faced with adversity, right? And so we're not ones to easily give up.
Yeah, of course.
So, depending on the severity of the problem, you could call in a group of people who may be the experts. Maybe they're the ones that built the system or designed the system. Um, or maybe it's just a fluke. Sometimes, the radiation might just hit the computer bit in just the wrong way that it
Yeah.
spazzes out. It's, you just clear it and go, right? It just kind of depends on what the problem is. So.
Yeah. So most of them, it's usually resolvable. Reboot, new software, things like that. Oh,
Mhm.
that's good. I don't know. I'd be so stressed about hardware issues.
Yeah, and that's also where the test beds come in. So,
Yeah.
we may, if we want to test out fixing something, we want to try it out here on Earth because it's a lot easier to fix something here on Earth
Yeah.
than it is in space.
That's cool. All right. Well, yeah, that's amazing. So might move on to some of those other questions now. This has been very interesting. So many other questions, but I don't think we'll have time for that. um, so, what hobby or interest do you have that is most unrelated to your field of work?
So, I think the answer there is cake decorating. Um,
Ew.
yes. So, my mom was always really frustrated with like just the store bought cakes, and she was like, I could do better than this. And so she just like went to some bakery and was like, please teach me how to decorate cakes. And so these people taught her how to do all the like special icing and like all that kind of stuff.
Nice.
And so when I was old enough, late elementary school, whatever it was,
Yeah.
um she's like, I'm going to teach you so you can do this later on. And so I learned how to make all the cakes. So every celebration the school ever had, I made a cake for and decorated.
Nice.
And that has definitely continued on to work as well. So if someone has like a birthday party or something at work, I make the cake.
That's cool. So, is it like those little raw icing cakes or is it like soft icing piping type of decoration?
Yeah, I do all the like hand piping, all that kind of stuff. So
Ooh,
I have a lot of the cake pans that do, the shaped cakes. So I have like an astronaut one and a Wally one and a R2D2 one, of course, and
of
a couple
course.
different styles. I think my favorite one is actually a Christmas tree. And I'll get
Ooh,
all the little like sugar decorations of like little nutcrackers and stars and all that kind of stuff. And um, you that one I think is my favorite. You can do like coconut on the bottom as snow, and
yeah.
then use the different icing tips. You can have the garland in different colors, and you can use M's and M's to be the little like ball ornaments, and you can put them on and all that kind of stuff. So that's usually my favorite to decorate.
Oh, that's amazing. That's such a cool hobby. Like just being able to work with your hands and doing all that kind of stuff. That's cool.
Mhm.
And yeah, and sort of related but unrelated, you also do a lot of cosplay for Rebel Legion.
Yeah. So as you can see behind me, here's some of my costumes actually on
Ooh,
mannequins.
yes,
Yeah.
that's
So
awesome.
yeah. So I typically cosplay as Rey
Yeah,
from the new Star Wars movies. But I also have a Jedi that I do as well. And then non
nice.
Star Wars related, I've done like 13th Doctor from Doctor Who.
Oh, very
Um,
cool.
Gosh, what else have I done? Trying to think of what else in my closet. I don't know. Now I can't think of any of the others off my top of my head, but I have a lot of other like cosplays and things. Another fun one I've done is Doctor Who Star Wars crossover,
Yeah.
and so
Nice.
the Fourth Doctor has this particular scarf that he likes to wear, and
Yes.
so um, I did a Ray cosplay, but I had her arm sleeves instead of it being like the bandage wraps was actually Fourth Doctor theme
Oh,
wraps.
that's
I have his
nice.
scarf as her like cross tabard,
Yeah.
you know, things on the front. And I'm working on making a Dalek cosplay for my R2, so he'll be
Oh,
able to join me
wonderful.
when I do that costume.
Oh,
And
that would
I
be such a cool
purposely made it like
crossover.
a bad cosplay, so it's just like cardboard and foam balls with like a
Yeah.
plunger tied to his arm, a wrist tied to the other one.
Yeah.
So it's like clear it's R2 cosplaying as a Dalek. There's other R2 builders that have made like shells that kind of like snap on to their R2, so it looks
Yep.
like a real Dalek. But I'm like, that's not the fun part. I want him to
No, the fun
cosplay.
part, yeah, you want him to look like he's giving it a good hard try.
Exactly.
That's nice. So you make a lot of do you make all of your costumes yourself?
So I am definitely not talented in sewing. So I get these commissioned by
Oh,
talented friends. But there
oh,
are a
very
couple
cool.
pieces I've done. Uh, Scrolling over, so like raised cross tabards on this particular
Yeah.
costume. That's just a piece of fabric that I bought, cut in half, and dyed. So that was not a very intense part.
Yep.
What else did I? The staff, even though I didn't make the staff itself, I
Yeah.
had to like uh, attach it better. The way it was attached made it very loose, and so I had to do
Yeah.
some machine work there to get it to stay together better.
That's
Trying to
cool.
think of what various things.
Yeah, I love it.
So yeah.
That's cool. Cool. And is that a porg I see in the background?
Oh yeah, I have a cardboard cutout of porgs at R2D2. Let me see if I can scroll it down.
Ah,
So
is that your so that's your R2?
yes, I'm very obsessed with porgs. So
Ah, that's so cute.
yep.
Oh, and did I see that you were writing a paper on porgs?
Ah, yes.
Tell
So,
me about that.
one of my favorites that I've done so far is for a while I was in charge of training on Perseverance. And one of the things we wanted to develop was simulations where um, a lot of the way that you train on how to operate Mars rovers, not just the rover planners, but any other role, is to what we call shadow other people, where you sit in the chair next to them. First you just watch, and then eventually you start doing little tasks that, they'll kind of scroll over, let you do it, you move back until you're the one running it while they're just watching you.
Yeah.
But it takes a long time to train that way. And so we wanted to do training simulations that were similar to how Johnson Space Center trains their flight controllers for the International Space Station, the astronauts for their flights. And so one of the first things when I took this training job was they said, here's this idea for simulations. You need to like run with it and make it some sort of like official name. And I had a team, and they knew me very well. So one of the team members, the acronym has to be PORG, and we'll back figure out what the acronym is based on that.
I love how
So we
nerdy all of you are.
finally some practical operational readiness gambits. And so, even though we haven't really implemented them on 2020, because I transitioned to this helicopter role instead, on Curiosity, we were training this new set of rover drivers,
Yeah.
and they were supposed to start these shadow shifts in April. How were we going to do that remote? Because we were all still struggling at that point, figuring out how do you have the two meetings or everything going on. And so we didn't want to have any trainees on shift because I would just make it even more complicated. And so I said, well, I've got this training simulation idea. Can I just run with it? And so a couple weeks after lockdown started, I started running these sims every Thursday, and they've been a huge help in
Nice.
preparing our new trainees. And so now that we've kind of figured out what we're doing, getting settled into the remote ops regime, we've actually started letting the trainees on shift now. And so folks have been really impressed because normally they
Yeah.
come in, they have no ops experience because most of the time it's robotics people who aren't used to like operating the rovers. They're used to like building robots, right? And So a lot of the experienced rover drivers are like, oh my gosh, they actually know like what the meetings are, and they know how to like log in, and they know what to present at the meetings, like because we'd simulate it all and we practice and we practice and we practice, and so that's been pretty satisfying. And so there's a conference coming up in March where the Curiosity team said, why don't you write a paper about these porgs and submit it? And so the word porg is in it 101 times, which I'm very happy. So
That's, yeah, amazing. Can't wait to see the proceedings, just like porgs in the headline. So you'll be presenting that?
yeah, so it's going to be a virtual conference. So I will be virtually presenting about porgs, and I promise I will stick a like picture of a porg somewhere in a slide
Yes,
as like a hidden,
must.
you know.
Ah, yeah, that's awesome. Okay, and next one. Which childhood book holds the strongest memories for you?
Gosh, that would be really hard because I was always kind of the shy nerd growing up, so I pretty much spent all my time in libraries reading books.
Yeah.
I would say probably the biggest impact book I would say is probably the Lord of the Rings series. I was
Mm,
actually a lot more into like the fantasy quest wizard style books growing up instead of the more like hard sci-fi kind of books. And so I remember for one of my birthdays, a friend got me like this gigantic copy. It was all three Lord of the Rings books in one, so it's like this big.
yeah.
Um, you know, and I remember reading it very passionately. And then, of course, very shortly after I finished reading that, they announced that they were going to do, Peter Jackson's
Yeah.
trilogy. And so that was pretty fun to like read it and then immediately go see it in the movies, kind of thing.
Oh, that's
Um,
wonderful.
yeah, so that's the one that like stands out in my mind.
What was your favorite part about the trilogy? About, the story and, how it kind of made you feel about it?
I guess kind of the quest for hope, right? Like even at the darkest hour, there's still hope.
I'm
Um,
seeing a thread
you know,
here.
yeah. I wonder how that relates to Star
Ooh.
Wars and any other. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be the best, biggest, person, right? It's the common
Yeah.
person that can save the day. That's kind of a nice overarching theme as well.
Yeah. That's a good thing. And lastly, what advice would you give someone who would like to do what you do, or what advice should they ignore?
Yeah. So my favorite piece of advice to give is don't be afraid to talk to someone who's doing something you're interested in. Um, Whether it's, you're in high school and you're starting to look at universities, you can email professors. I found typically the worst thing they will do is just ignore your email. And typically that doesn't even mean that they're ignoring you. It just means that stream of emails, like,
Yeah.
they haven't. So feel free to send again if you haven't heard a response in a while, because most people, if they're working on something, they're pretty passionate about it, and so the fact that they have someone interested, they're like, oh yeah, of course I want to tell you all about it because I'm really excited about this thing.
Yeah.
So I mean, had I not sent that email to this professor, at university, would I have ended up in this? I don't know, right?
Yeah.
um, so don't be afraid to talk to others. And I would also say feel free to explore topics. So, when I was not really sure what I wanted to do space wise, meteorology wise, anything like that, even in college, I still was kind of unsure. Like, I knew this space stuff was kind of cool, but how did I want to proceed with it? And so I actually worked in the astronomy department for a little while on the Hubble Space Telescope doing some
Ooh.
research there. And I found that I absolutely hated it. Like I love looking through my own telescopes, going out in the desert or wherever it is, looking up stuff. I love working on Mars. Don't care about stars at all. Anything related to the research of stars, I'm just like, I'm out. I'm done. Um, so don't be afraid to like experiment. You may find this may be interesting reading about it, but when you're actually doing it, you're like, nah, thanks. It had nothing to do with like the professor. He was great. It was everything. It just wasn't for me. And so I think that's a good way, whether it's internships or just like trying to work in a lab at university, whatever it is, don't be afraid to also like back out if you don't
Yeah.
like it.
That's definitely a good one.
Yep.
What did you not like about the Hubble stuff, like specifically?
I'm still just trying to figure that out because it wasn't that different from what I was doing with my Mars stuff. It
Yeah.
was like looking at Hubble images and doing image analysis to look at like the brightness of stars. Well, my entire master's thesis is looking at the brightness of stars and pictures from Mars.
Yes.
So I don't know.
Something about the
It just,
context.
yeah, I maybe just like I understood more about what I was doing for the Mars side and less about what I was doing for Hubble, because I didn't understand, like, I was looking more at variable stars and I didn't
Yeah.
understand variable stars in the way that I understood like the Martian atmosphere. So maybe that's part of it. If I had actually like spent more time researching, you know, the stars, maybe I wouldn't have been that bad. I don't know.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, just something about it. Well, thank you so much, Keri, for speaking with me today. It's been, yeah, absolutely mind-blowing learning about all the cool stuff you do, all the stuff that you're super passionate about. And yeah, really feeling that, kindred spirits being such huge nerds. So that's cool. So if people would love to reach out to you, learn more about you and your work, where can they do that?
So I'm pretty active on Twitter and Instagram as Planetary Keri, and that's Keri. I just like the rhyme as well. It's very nice.
Yes.
And then I also have a website, keribean.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And yeah, it's been wonderful having you on. And good luck with the projects and the landing in February. And yeah, have a wonderful day.
Great. Thank you.
Learning about the rover missions has been brilliant, and it's been fascinating to get a little insight into how the technical and operational work for projects of this scale are coordinated, Earthside and now remotely. It's also tickled me to learn how Keri has been able to combine her love of Star Wars with her work at NASA in so many ways. To learn more about Keri and what we discuss on the show, or to connect with us, please visit the Steam Powered website at steampoweredshow.com. You can also reach out to Keri on Twitter and Instagram under Planetary Keri, that's Keri, and her website, the links for which will be in the show notes. If you enjoyed this conversation, please let me know. Subscribe to this channel, leave a comment below, and share this with your geeky and geek-curious friends. You can also support Steam Powered on Patreon and Ko-fi under Steam Powered Show, the links for which will also be in the show notes. Thanks for watching!